Alien beast woman Warlord tosses me her blade, says we're mated if I can hold it. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story don't forget to subscribe. Jack Mercer had never been one to back down from a challenge. That's how he ended up in the middle of a battlefield, not with a gun in hand but with words, trying to broker peace between two warring factions on the outer rim of the galaxy. But the mission had gone south quickly. The so-called peace talks turned into an ambush, leaving Jack and his team stranded in the heart of an alien war zone. The dust, the smell of burning metal, and the echoes of distant roars painted a grim picture. The battle raged around them, but Jack couldn't focus on the violence anymore. He was too busy trying to get himself out of this mess. He scrambled behind a jagged piece of metal wreckage, adjusting his comm unit. His team was scattered, trying to regroup, but there was no time to wait for backup. There was no communication, no way of reaching anyone. His only option was to survive, to get to the extraction point. But that was easier said than done when the world seemed intent on throwing obstacles at him at every turn. The sound of footsteps approaching made Jack freeze. He held his breath, listening. The dust settled, and through the haze, he saw a silhouette, towering and unmistakable. A warrior. A massive beast woman, her white fur streaked with the dirt and blood of battle. Her fire-orange eyes flicked toward him, her war paint a striking contrast to her fierce expression. She was a force of nature, her movements fluid but deadly. Her armor was torn, but she looked like she was born for this chaos, this destruction. Jack's hand instinctively went to the sidearm on his hip, but before he could draw it, she spoke, her voice a low growl that vibrated through the air. "Throw it." She didn't move, didn't even flinch as she stood a few paces away. Her hand shot out, and without warning, she tossed a weapon at him. It was long, heavy, too much to catch without some serious skill. Jack's reflexes kicked in before his brain had the chance to process, and he reached out, instinctively grabbing the handle. His fingers closed around the blade, the metal cold in his grip. She steadied him, her eyes narrowing. "You caught it." Jack was still processing what had just happened, staring at the gleaming blade in his hand. His heart raced, but his thoughts were more confused than panicked. Was this some kind of test? The beast woman didn't seem like she was going to explain. She only raised an eyebrow, as though she expected something from him. "Now you'll fight," she said, her voice thick with authority. "You hold my blade. You hold my fate." Jack didn't know what she meant by that. She had thrown a weapon at him, and now he was supposed to hold on to it? A part of him wanted to protest, to ask for clarification, but the way she looked at him made it clear that this wasn't a question. This was a command, one that left him no room for doubt or hesitation. He had caught her blade, now he had to figure out what came next. "I don't want any part of this," Jack said, his voice steady, trying to keep control of the situation. The woman smirked, her fangs flashing beneath her lips. "Too late, human. You are mated now." Jack blinked. Mated? What in the galaxy was she talking about? She stepped closer, and the tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Her eyes, blazing with intensity, never left his as she closed the distance between them. "You caught my blade. In my culture, that means you're bound to me now. You hold my weapon, and with it, you hold me. You are mated." Jack's pulse quickened. He felt the weight of the blade in his hand, still holding it with a mix of confusion and wariness. He wasn't sure if this was some kind of cultural misunderstanding or if the woman was toying with him. But one thing was certain, the look in her eyes was not something you ignored. "Look," Jack began, taking a step back. "I don't know what your customs are, but I'm not here for any of this. I'm just trying to survive." The beast woman's lips curled into a smile that was both dangerous and amused. "You caught my blade. You are now bound to me in a way that your people would never understand. You've survived by luck so far, but the real test is ahead. You're in my world now, and I will make sure you learn what that means." Jack's mind raced. He had read about different cultures and customs across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for this. He wasn't just caught in the middle of a war zone anymore. He was caught in the middle of something far more personal, a challenge that had nothing to do with diplomacy or negotiation. This was a test of strength, of survival, and of power. Before he could react, the woman motioned to her warriors who had been watching from the sidelines. They moved aside, clearing a path for Jack. "You'll fight," she said, her voice low but full of authority. "If you want to survive in my world, you'll fight." Jack's mind whirled. He had no weapons beyond the blade she had thrown at him, and he didn't know the rules of this world. He had been thrust into the middle of something he wasn't prepared for, and he was going to have to rely on everything he knew just to make it through. This wasn't a diplomatic mission anymore. This was a battle for survival, a battle for respect, and one he couldn't back down from. "What happens if I don't?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The beast woman's eyes flared with fire. "You won't have a choice." The silence that followed was thick. Jack could feel the eyes of the warriors on him, their gaze heavy with expectation. The choice was no longer his. He had caught her blade, and with it, his fate was sealed. He had become part of this world, whether he liked it or not. With a final glance at the woman who had thrown him into this chaos, Jack steeled himself. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to learn what it meant to live in a world like this. He had to fight, not just for himself, but for the future he didn't yet understand. "Let's do this," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. The beast woman smirked, her gaze full of both challenge and something more, something Jack couldn't yet name. "Then prove it," she said, and the battle began. Jack's hand tightened around the blade, his fingers feeling the cold metal and the heat of the challenge wrapped up in it. The beast woman, callous, stood across from him, her fiery orange eyes watching him with an intensity that made his heart race. The tension was thick in the air, almost palpable, and the surrounding warriors stood silent, observing him like a spectacle. "Let's see if you truly understand what you've done, human," Callus said, her voice low and commanding. "The blade you hold isn't just a weapon. It's a mark. A claim." Jack kept his focus, but the weight of her words sank in deeper than the cold steel of the blade in his hand. This was more than a battle. This was a test, not just of strength, but of something much more fundamental. His survival, his future, now hung in the balance, and everything in him screamed to fight, to prove that he belonged in this world. Callus raised her chin, her posture defiant, strong. The warriors behind her shifted slightly, waiting for her command. The air felt still for a moment before she spoke again, this time with a cold edge. "You will fight me, or you will prove yourself in another way. Defeat me or survive in my world. Either way, we are bound. The choice is yours." The entire group of warriors stood unmoving, watching Jack. He could feel their eyes on him, a pressure unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was one thing to be thrust into a war zone, to negotiate between worlds, but this was personal. This was raw. Jack's grip on the blade tightened further, the sharp edge cutting into his palm, but the pain only seemed to sharpen his focus. He wasn't a fool. This wasn't about strength alone, it was about adaptability, about surviving a challenge he hadn't been prepared for, but couldn't back down from. Callus took a slow step forward, her boots crunching against the rocky ground. "I've seen many men cower. I've seen them beg for mercy. They have all failed. But you are different. You're still here." He couldn't read her expression. There was something in her voice that wasn't purely combative, it was something deeper, a challenge wrapped in curiosity. Jack met her gaze with a quiet resolve, his stance steady despite the uncertainty of the situation. "I'm not afraid of you," he said evenly, but the words felt heavier than he intended. "But I'm not here to fight for your people. I'm here to survive." Callus's lips twitched, though she didn't smile. "Your survival is my choice now," she said, her voice taking on a darker edge. "If you can hold my blade, if you can prove yourself, then we are bound by law. Your fate is mine. And I will take what is mine." The word struck him like a blow, though his body didn't flinch. This wasn't about the blade anymore. This wasn't about surviving the fight. This was about something deeper, a deeper bond he didn't fully understand. Jack gritted his teeth. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't about to lose. He glanced around at the warriors who stood behind Callus. They were watching him closely, some with the cold indifference of seasoned fighters, others with curiosity. He didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. The tension crackled between them, and Jack could almost feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. Callus took another step forward, but this time, she didn't come in close. She circled him, sizing him up like a lioness might size up prey. She was trying to provoke him, to see what he was made of. But Jack had learned a thing or two about staying calm under pressure. He couldn't let her get into his head. The warrior's eyes were on him, but Jack focused on Callus. He couldn't let her get the upper hand. He had to fight her with his mind as much as his body. Every move she made was calculated, and he had to stay one step ahead, ready to adjust to whatever came next. Callus's next move was quick, almost too quick for Jack to follow, but he reacted just in time, his instincts taking over. He raised the blade to block her first strike, a slash that would have cleaved him in half had he hesitated. The force of her blow sent a shock through his arms, but he held firm. The clang of steel on steel echoed in the silence that followed. She grinned, clearly impressed. Not bad, human. Jack didn't respond, his focus narrowing. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. She was fast, strong, and experienced, but he had his own skills that went beyond fighting. He had to use what he knew to win, not just brute strength. Callus lunged again, and this time Jack stepped to the side, avoiding the strike but narrowly missing her claws as they swiped toward his face. She was relentless, each movement calculated to drive him back, to force him to make a mistake. Jack parried another blow, but he was tiring. She was playing him, testing his limits. Why don't you just admit it? Callus taunted, her voice a soft growl. You're mine now. All of you. Jack gritted his teeth, frustration building. This wasn't about submission, about dominance. This was a test. If he could hold his own, if he could endure, then maybe, just maybe, he would prove his worth. Not if I have a say in it, Jack muttered, his focus narrowing. He wasn't about to let her win this so easily. In one swift motion, he lunged, driving the blade toward Callus in a series of quick, fluid strikes that surprised even him. For a split second, her guard faltered. He could see it in her eyes, the challenge, the acknowledgement that he was more than just a diplomat. He was a fighter. She grinned, and for the first time, Jack saw something else in her expression. Respect. She stepped back, her stance shifting, and she lowered her blade just slightly. You've proven yourself. Jack didn't lower his guard. He knew better than to assume the fight was over. You're not just here to survive, are you? She said quietly, her eyes locking onto his. You're here to prove that you deserve this place. And you're doing it. Jack didn't know what came next, but he understood now. Callus hadn't thrown him into the fire to see if he would burn. She had thrown him to test his strength, his resolve, and his willingness to accept what she was offering. And in that moment, he realized he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for a future, one that was bound by more than just survival. Let's see where this goes, Jack said, his voice steady, as the next chapter of their strange, explosive connection began. Jack stood in the center of the dust-covered battlefield, the weight of Callus's blade still in his hands. The fight had ended in a strange stalemate, neither of them having won, but something more important had been decided. He had held his ground. In her eyes, that was enough. In his eyes, it was the beginning of something he didn't understand but couldn't walk away from. Callus, still standing tall and regal despite the mess of battle around them, nodded slightly in his direction. She hadn't spoken since their duel had ended, but the look in her fiery orange eyes told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't over. There was something deeper now, a connection between them that neither of them could deny. I didn't expect you to hold on so long, Callus said after a long pause, breaking the silence. Her voice was rough, laced with a mixture of respect and something darker. You've earned more than just your life. Jack lowered the blade, his arms sore but steady. I wasn't planning on giving up, he said. His voice was calm, even if his body felt like it had been through a storm. But I didn't expect to be fighting for more than survival. The battlefield around them was littered with the remnants of war, broken weapons, fallen warriors, and the stench of burnt metal. But Jack didn't see any of it. His focus was on Callus. She wasn't just a beast woman warlord anymore. She was something else entirely, someone he had only just begun to understand. Callus stepped closer to him, her movements measured and deliberate. Survival is the least of it, she said, her gaze never wavering. You've caught my blade, human. That means something. To me. To my people. Jack could feel the weight of her words sink in. Her people. This wasn't just about him and her anymore. It was about a tribe, a warlord's claim, and a future he had never imagined. The world he was now a part of wasn't one he could simply leave behind. Whether he liked it or not, he had become entangled in a story far bigger than his own. And what does it mean? Jack asked, the question on the tip of his tongue. He needed to know, needed to understand why she had chosen him for this strange claim. Callus looked at him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. It means you are mated to me. You're no longer just an outsider, Jack. You're a part of my tribe now, bound to me in a way no one else can be. The word made it hit him like a ton of bricks. He had assumed it was just some strange, alien custom. But the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, as if it was something beyond a mere tradition, made him realize the full weight of her words. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his life, the life he had once known, was slipping away. I didn't ask for this, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. He wasn't angry at her, not really. But this wasn't what he had come here for. This was a war, a fight for survival, not a partnership. Callus didn't flinch. Instead, she seemed to steady him for a moment, as though weighing his words. No one asks for the bond, Jack, she said quietly. Not like this. But you've proven yourself in a way no one else could. You held my blade. And now, you hold my future, whether you want to or not. There it was again. The weight of her gaze. The pressure of her words. He could feel it all, the pull of her, the pull of this strange world, and the realization that he couldn't simply walk away. But he couldn't ignore the uncertainty that still clouded his thoughts. I don't know what that means for me, Jack said, his voice softer now. I didn't come here for this. I came here to help broker peace, to get my team out of this mess. I didn't expect to be mated to a warlord. Callus stepped even closer, closing the distance between them until she was nearly pressing against him. Her presence was commanding, but not threatening. It was the presence of someone who had seen it all, someone who knew the weight of power and the cost of survival. You don't have to understand it, Jack, she said, her voice quiet but full of intent. You just have to accept it. You're a part of this now. Whether you wanted it or not. The words hit him hard, but they made sense in a way he hadn't expected. The battle was over for now, but the war inside him had just begun. The internal struggle of whether to fight this bond or embrace it. He had caught her blade, had fought for his life, and in doing so, had unknowingly claimed his place in her world. Callus reached for his hand, her grip firm, and as she pulled him toward her, Jack could feel it, feel the power in the touch. The power of the bond she had claimed. The power of the tribe she led. The power of what she was asking of him. I've never had a mate who could stand beside me like you, Callus said, her voice low. I've fought wars, built empires, but this is different. We're stronger together than we ever could be apart. Jack didn't know how to respond. He didn't know if he could accept everything she was offering, but he couldn't ignore the pull between them, the way she made him feel in a way that was impossible to explain. This wasn't just a physical attraction, it was deeper, more visceral. There was something in the way she spoke, and the way she commanded the space around her, that made him want to stay. But the question still lingered, did he truly want to be here? With her? In this world? I didn't come here to be a warrior, Jack said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. But I'll fight if I have to. I'll fight for you. For this. Callus studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she gave a small nod, her lips curling into a smile that was both fierce and approving. You already are fighting, Jack, she said softly. And for that, I am grateful. Jack didn't know what the future held, but as he stood there with Callus, the blade still clutched in his hand, he understood one thing: he wasn't leaving this world anytime soon. Whether he liked it or not, he was part of it now. Part of her. And that meant something more than just survival. It meant he was mated. And whatever that meant, he was going to find out. The days after the challenge with Callus were a whirlwind of strange new rituals, unspoken expectations, and increasing tension. Jack had expected to find some way to retreat from the situation, to maybe slip away when no one was looking, but every move he made was watched. The other warriors didn't speak to him much, but the few who did regarded him with suspicion, mixed with a begrudging respect. He wasn't sure what was worse, being watched or being ignored. Callus was different, though. She had kept her distance since the fight. When she spoke to him, it was always in private, her voice low, her presence overwhelming. She didn't give him any space to think. The moment he set foot outside his quarters, she was there, reminding him of the bond they shared and the position he now held, whether he was ready for it or not. Jack didn't know what to make of her. Part of him admired her, her power, her unshakable leadership. Another part of him couldn't help but be irritated by the situation. He wasn't one to be thrust into a new life without warning. He was a diplomat, a negotiator. He didn't belong in a world where strength ruled over everything else. But now, more than ever, it was clear that he didn't have a choice. He had been caught in Callus's world, bound by a challenge he didn't fully understand but couldn't escape. He had caught her blade, and that had sealed his fate. It was a law of her people. On the third day, Callus called him into her war tent. The light outside had started to fade, casting long shadows over the battlefield where they had first met. The ground was still littered with the remnants of the skirmish, a stark reminder of the violence that had brought them together. Come, Callus's voice echoed from the entrance. Jack hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The air in the tent was warm despite the chill outside. Callus was sitting at the center, her war harness hanging loosely over her shoulders. The firelight caught in her orange eyes, giving her an almost ethereal quality. You've been avoiding me, she said, not accusing, but observing. Jack wasn't sure how to respond. He couldn't quite figure out whether he was afraid of her or intrigued by her, or perhaps a combination of both. I'm not avoiding you, he said, though it wasn't entirely true. I've just been thinking. Callus tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. About what? I don't know. About everything. About how things are changing too fast. Her gaze softened, just for a second, before it hardened again. You have no time to waste on doubts, Jack. You're part of this now, whether you understand it or not. And you will lead beside me, not behind me. Jack took a deep breath. I didn't sign up to be a warlord, he said, the words coming out sharper than he intended. Callus stood up slowly, crossing the space between them in a few long strides. No, she agreed, her voice quiet, almost challenging. You didn't. But you accepted the bond. You caught my blade. That is more than just a ritual, it's a responsibility. She paused, looking up at him with a mixture of something unreadable in her eyes. You've already proven yourself in ways most couldn't. Jack's heart raced as the realization hit him again, the one he had been avoiding. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He wasn't just here by accident. His fate was tied to Callus, her people, and this planet. There was no running from that. I don't want to be a pawn in some tribal power game, Jack said, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside him. Callus's gaze never wavered. You're not a pawn. But you're more than just a survivor. You can't see it yet, but you're capable of much more than you think. Jack's frustration was building. He didn't know how to navigate this world. There were rules here he didn't understand, rules he hadn't agreed to. And yet, he found himself drawn to her, to the challenge, to the strange sense of belonging that started to creep into his thoughts. "I don't want to be just some leader's mate," Jack said finally. "I want something more than that." Callus's eyes narrowed, but this time, it wasn't with anger. It was something else. "I never asked for a mate either, Jack. Not like this. But you're here now. You've made your choice." There was something in her words that stopped him in his tracks. He had made his choice. And he knew that it wasn't just about surviving anymore. He had stepped into a world where power, trust, and loyalty meant everything, and he was learning, slowly, that he had a place in it. "You've proven your strength, Jack," Callus said, her voice low and steady, "and now you will prove your worth. Not just to me, but to the tribe. You will fight with us, lead beside me, and show them that you are not just a man from another world. You are one of us." Jack shook his head. "I didn't come here to lead anyone." "You're already leading," she replied, her tone quiet but sure. "You've already led by surviving. Now you will lead by doing what no one else could." Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no denying it, she was right. He had already taken the first step. The challenge was no longer whether he belonged in this world, it was whether he was strong enough to step into the role that had been thrust upon him. "What do you want from me, Callus?" Jack asked, his voice quieter now. He wasn't sure he was ready for the answer, but he had to ask. Callus's gaze softened slightly, though there was still that underlying fierceness. "I want you to fight for us. To fight for the future of this tribe. To fight for what you've started." Jack stood there, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. The fire in her eyes wasn't just a reflection of her strength, it was an invitation, a challenge. If he truly wanted to be part of this world, he had to prove it. He had to fight, not just for his survival, but for the future they could build together. Without another word, Callus turned and walked to the entrance of the tent, her movement commanding, her strength undeniable. "The next challenge begins tomorrow," she said, her voice carrying an air of finality. "You will be ready." Jack stood in the middle of the tent, the blade still in his hand. He wasn't sure what the future held. But he knew one thing, it wasn't going to be easy. And he wasn't going to back down. He had a new path now, one that would be forged by strength, by loyalty, and by a bond that neither of them could have anticipated. And whatever came next, he would face it, not just as an outsider, but as part of something greater. With Callus by her side. As the tent flaps fluttered in the wind, Jack took a deep breath and followed her into the unknown. The days following Callus's challenge had been a blur of training, harsh tests, and unspoken expectations. Jack had always prided himself on his adaptability, his ability to think on his feet, to navigate even the most difficult political situations. But this was different. This wasn't about negotiating peace or managing people from behind a desk. This was about survival. This was about proving himself worthy of a world he had never asked for. Callus's presence was ever constant. She moved like the leader she was, her fiery orange eyes always watching, assessing, and pushing him in ways that made him question everything he thought he knew about strength. Her warriors watched him too, with mixed expressions, some with grudging respect, others with cold indifference. But none of them challenged him. Not directly, at least. Instead, they waited. They all waited for him to falter, to prove that he wasn't capable of what Callus had chosen him for. Jack had been given a room in the Warlord's compound, but it felt more like a holding cell than a place of refuge. The walls were adorned with trophies of battles won, beast skulls, worn banners, and faded war paintings. Every morning, he was woken up with a new challenge, a new task to prove that he belonged. It wasn't just physical combat, there were lessons in tactics, leadership, and survival. At first, he resisted, wondering what this was all leading to, but soon enough, the purpose became clear. If he was to be mated to Callus in the eyes of her people, he had to prove that he was worthy of her and the leadership role she carried. It was about more than survival. It was about uniting their destinies, about showing the world that he wasn't just some outsider who had stumbled into this chaos. Callus had given him a blade of his own now, a finely crafted weapon that matched the one she wielded. He had trained with it every day, learning its weight and balance, but also learning how to wield it with purpose. The warriors who sparred with him were fierce, testing him relentlessly, yet he found himself rising to the challenge, each defeat fueling his determination. The bond between him and Callus was growing, but it wasn't just physical, it was a partnership that had to be earned, and he was learning how. One evening, after an especially grueling training session, Jack collapsed on a nearby stone bench, his muscles aching but his mind clear. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep this up. The exhaustion was starting to take its toll, but more than that, he was beginning to question the bond that had been forced upon him. His feelings for Callus were real, there was no denying that, but the more he got to know her, the more he saw that this wasn't just about love. It was about power, survival, and the intricate politics of a world that didn't operate by the same rules he was used to. "Don't stop now," Callus's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood before him, her posture commanding, her gaze unreadable. "You're getting better. You're almost there." Jack looked up at her, his breath still labored. "I didn't realize I was here to be your apprentice," he said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and frustration. "I thought we were supposed to be equals." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "You're getting there," she said, crouching in front of him, her eyes locking with his. "But strength doesn't just come from fighting. It comes from knowing when to lead and when to follow. And right now, Jack, you're following." Jack stared at her for a long moment, not sure how to respond. He had been following her in more ways than one, but was he truly ready to lead beside her? He had never thought of himself as a leader, let alone the partner of a powerful warlord. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he finally admitted. "I came here to help, not to," he gestured around him, frustrated. "I didn't come here to be part of this." Callus's eyes softened then, and for the first time, Jack saw something beyond the warrior. He saw the woman behind the mask, the leader burdened by the weight of a people depending on her. "I never asked for this either," she said, her voice quieter now. "I never asked for a mate, for someone who could fight beside me, not just physically, but as an equal. But you're here. And I can't change that." Jack looked at her, the weight of her words settling into him. She wasn't just speaking as a warlord, she was speaking as a woman who had fought her entire life to be respected, to be seen as more than just her strength. And now, she was offering him something he hadn't expected, the chance to be by her side, not as a subordinate, but as her partner. "You don't have to do this alone," Jack said quietly, the words slipping out before he had a chance to reconsider them. "I don't want to be the reason you carry this burden. But I'll help you. I'll help us." Callus's eyes flickered with something, relief, perhaps, but more likely surprise. She hadn't expected him to offer himself so willingly, not after everything that had happened. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out and touched his shoulder, a simple gesture, but it meant more than any words could convey. "You've made the right choice, Jack," she said softly. "You understand. Now we fight for what comes next." Jack didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up, his body sore but his resolve stronger than it had ever been. The weight of the blade in his hand felt different now, not just as a weapon, but as a tool for something greater. He wasn't here to just survive anymore. He was here to fight, to lead, and to make something lasting with Callus, something that neither of them had planned for but both of them needed. They walked side by side to the training grounds, the warriors still gathered, waiting for their command. Callus's presence was enough to silence the group, but Jack felt something shift inside him as he stepped into her world fully. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a partner, and the responsibilities that came with that weren't just about leading an army, they were about leading a future. Together. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice steady as he met Callus's gaze. Callus nodded, the corner of her mouth twitching upward in a rare smile. "Then show them." And with that, Jack stepped forward, not just as a mate, but as the equal Callus had always needed. They would face whatever came next, not as two separate forces, but as one, united in strength, purpose, and an unspoken understanding that would carry them through anything. The next few weeks became a blur of challenges, intense training, and strategies. Jack had expected the usual military regimen: drills, physical endurance tests, and strategy sessions. But here, in Callus's world, it was different. Every day was an assessment, not just of his physical capabilities, but his mental fortitude, his ability to adapt. The tribal warriors tested him relentlessly, pushing him to the edge, and sometimes beyond. Callus had made it clear that he needed to earn his place, not just in her world, but in her tribe. And earning that place meant proving that he was more than a diplomat. He was expected to stand beside her, as her equal, in every sense. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling sparring match, Jack found himself once again lying on the cold stone floor, trying to catch his breath. His muscles were sore from the day's trials, but it wasn't just the physical pain that bothered him. It was the pressure. The realization that Callus was counting on him, that his survival meant more than just his life, it meant his role in shaping the future of her people. He had caught the blade, yes, but now, the weight of that catch was sinking in. Every action he took, every word he spoke, had consequences. Callus wasn't just offering him a place at her side, she was asking him to be her partner in everything. Leadership, war, survival, and trust. Callus walked over to him, her steps heavy but purposeful. She had been quiet since the sparring match, watching him from the sidelines, but now she knelt down next to him, her fierce gaze softening just a little as she met his eyes. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice low, but filled with a strange mix of admiration and expectation. "But you're not there yet. Not by a long shot." Jack exhaled sharply, still too winded to respond immediately. But her words stung. Not in an insulting way, but in a way that drove home the fact that his place here wasn't assured. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about proving that he was worthy of what they were building together. "I'm trying," Jack said, his voice barely above a rasp. "But this isn't like anything I've done before." Callus didn't look surprised. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, considering him. "It's not supposed to be like anything you've done before," she said. "You're not in your world anymore. Here, things are different. Power is earned. Strength is shown, not told. You've shown some of it, Jack. But you still have a long way to go." "I get that," Jack replied, pushing himself up to sit, though his body protested. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his hands shaking from exhaustion. "But what if I can't do it? What if I'm not cut out for this?" For a brief moment, Callus seemed to soften. "If I thought you weren't cut out for this, you wouldn't be standing here." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious. "You've been tested, Jack. But this is only the beginning. You're here to help me lead, not to follow me, not to be a pawn in my game." Jack looked at her, searching her face for some sign that she was serious. But it was there, clear in her eyes. She wasn't just a warlord. She was a woman who had led her people through chaos and bloodshed, and now, she was asking him to stand beside her. To be her equal. "I don't know how to do this," Jack admitted, his voice unsteady. "But I know I'm not walking away." Callus's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something softer. "That's the first step, Jack. You're not walking away. You're standing your ground." For a long moment, they just sat there, the weight of their shared responsibilities hanging heavy in the air between them. Jack wasn't sure where this path would take him. He wasn't sure if he was the right person for the job, or if he could live up to Callus's expectations. But in this moment, he knew one thing: he wasn't alone anymore. Not like he had been before. Callus had chosen him, not because he was perfect, but because she saw something in him, a strength he hadn't realized he had. Callus broke the silence, standing and extending a hand to him. "You've earned a rest. But tomorrow, we begin again." Jack took her hand, his grip firm, but his heart racing. There was something in her gaze, something that told him that this wasn't just a partnership forged by necessity. There was something deeper. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The next morning, Callus took Jack and a handful of the strongest warriors to the border of their territory, a desolate area where rival clans had been pushing for months. The tension between the tribes was growing, and Jack could see it in the eyes of the warriors, and the way Callus moved with purpose. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. This was war. As they approached the border, Jack noticed the remnants of a recent skirmish, burned-out structures, cracked stone, the stench of blood still lingering in the air. Callus's expression didn't change. She moved forward, commanding her warriors to set up a perimeter, her gaze scanning the horizon. "Are we just going to watch them?" Jack asked, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. Callus's voice was calm, but there was a fire in her words. "No. We're going to show them that we're not afraid to fight for what's ours." Jack nodded. "I'm with you." They spent the next few hours preparing for the battle, and as the sun set, the tension between the rival clans reached its peak. Jack could feel it in the air, thick with anticipation, with anger, and with fear. This was their chance to prove to the tribes, and to themselves, that Callus's leadership wasn't just about strength. It was about unity. The battle was fierce, and though Jack wasn't a soldier by any means, he held his ground. He fought with a ferocity that surprised him, matching Callus's warriors blow for blow. In the chaos of the fight, he found his place, not just as a partner to Callus, but as a leader in his own right. His diplomatic skills weren't enough here. It was his will, his resolve, that was being tested. When the battle ended, and the dust began to settle, Callus stood beside him, her blade in hand, victorious but solemn. Her eyes met his, and in that brief moment, Jack saw it, respect. Not just for his fighting ability, but for the man he was becoming. "You fought well, Jack," she said quietly, her voice filled with something more than just approval. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're leading." Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stood there, taking in the aftermath of the battle, the warriors who had followed them, and the people who now looked to Callus, and to him, for guidance. He wasn't sure he was ready to lead, but he was ready to fight for it. "We lead together," Jack said finally, his voice steady. Callus's gaze softened, a rare smile tugging at her lips. Together. The days following the battle felt like a turning point. Callus's victory had solidified her position as the leader of her people, but it had also set something in motion within Jack. He had never imagined himself in a situation like this, fighting for a world that wasn't his, leading a group of warriors alongside a fierce woman who had claimed him not just as her mate, but as her partner in everything. It was a responsibility he didn't fully understand, but one that he had started to accept. The tribe was more unified than ever, and Jack could feel the weight of his place among them. Callus had insisted on keeping him by her side, not just in battle but in the decisions that shaped their future. They had fought together, led together, and now they were building something lasting, together. But Jack still felt the tension beneath the surface. It wasn't just the tribe that was changing, it was him. He had started this journey as an outsider, a diplomat who had been thrown into a world he didn't understand. Now, he was a leader, whether he was ready for it or not. And every day, he found himself questioning his worth, wondering if he could truly rise to the occasion, or if he was simply playing the part of someone he wasn't. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack found himself standing on the edge of the compound, looking out over the vast landscape. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the faint sound of the tribe's evening drums. It was peaceful here, in a way, but the calm always felt temporary. He had learned that much. He heard footsteps behind him, and without turning, he knew it was Callus. She always moved with purpose, her presence impossible to ignore. He didn't need to see her to know she was watching him, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to face the reality of what they were becoming. "You've been distant lately," Callus said, her voice cutting through the stillness. "I thought we were past this." Jack turned to face her, the faint glow of the firelight reflecting in her eyes. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. There was no anger in her voice, only a quiet frustration that he could feel settling in his chest. "I'm not distant," Jack said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. I I'm not sure how to handle all this. Everything's moving too fast. Callus uncrossed her arms, stepping closer to him. This is how it's always been, Jack. Fast. Furious. You're not the only one feeling the weight of this. I know, Jack said quietly, glancing at the fire in the distance. But you've always been the one in control. I don't know if I'm ready to take on the responsibility of leading alongside you. Callus was silent for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost like a whisper. No one is ever ready for the kind of responsibility that comes with this. You think I've never questioned myself? I've been leading this tribe for longer than you've been here, and every day, I wonder if I'm doing it right. But I don't stop. I keep moving forward. That's what we do, Jack. We keep going. Jack met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words settle in. Callus had been leading for a long time, longer than he had known. She had carried the tribe's survival on her shoulders. And now, in this strange world, he was expected to carry that weight with her. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't expect any of this, Callus. The blade. The mating. It was all so fast. But now, it feels like there's no turning back. I'm part of this world, and I can't just walk away. Callus reached out, her hand finding his, the warmth of her touch grounding him. You're not supposed to walk away, she said. You're supposed to stand by me. To help lead. And in return, I'll always have your back. You're mine, and I'm yours. But it's not about ownership, Jack. It's about strength. We're stronger together than we ever could be apart. Jack nodded, his chest tightening at the sincerity in her words. It was easy to forget, in the heat of battle, in the pressure of their leadership, that they were more than just warriors. They were partners. And the bond they had formed was more than just a battle strategy. It was something that went deeper, something that neither of them had expected, but neither could deny. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I never asked for any of this. Callus's hand squeezed his, her grip firm and unwavering. No one ever asks, Jack. Strength comes in different forms. Yours isn't just in battle. It's in your mind, your heart. I've seen it. I've felt it. I wouldn't have chosen you if I didn't believe in you. Jack met her gaze, feeling the intensity of her words sink in. There was no doubt in his mind now. He had been chosen for something greater. He wasn't just here to survive, he was here to lead, to help build something lasting, with Callus by his side. The weight of the moment hung between them, but instead of feeling suffocating, it felt like a promise. A promise to not just survive in this world, but to thrive in it. Together. You don't have to prove yourself to me, Jack, Callus continued, her voice steady. But I need you to prove it to yourself. Lead with me. Fight beside me. We've already proven that we're stronger together. Let's keep showing them that. Jack took a deep breath, letting the words settle into his chest. I'm with you, Callus, he said finally. I'm not running. I'll stand beside you. I'll fight for us. Callus smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that softened her features. She reached up, brushing her fingers lightly against his jaw. I knew you would, she whispered. The fire crackled in the distance, the heat of the flames matching the fire that burned between them. In that moment, Jack realized he wasn't just part of this world anymore. He had found a place, a purpose. And no matter what challenges came next, no matter how difficult the road ahead was, he wasn't facing it alone. Together. That was their strength. And together, they would lead. The following weeks passed with a relentless intensity. Jack had finally settled into his role, though the path to understanding Callus's world, and his place in it, was far from straightforward. The challenge, the bond, had not just tested his physical strength, it had tested his will, his loyalty, and his capacity to adapt to a world where power and survival were all that mattered. Callus's trust in him had grown, as had their bond. He had expected the connection to be some fleeting form of survival strategy, something to get through the battle and move on, but it was becoming clear that it was something far deeper, something that couldn't be easily undone. They weren't just mates by chance anymore, they were allies in a war that was far larger than either of them. Jack had started to realize that Callus's tribe wasn't simply fighting for territory, they were fighting for their very survival, and his involvement in that fight had become a key component. But despite everything, Jack couldn't shake the weight of the responsibility he now carried. The more he worked beside Callus, the more he saw how difficult her life had been, not just as a warlord, but as someone who had to constantly prove herself, who had to balance the raw brutality of leadership with the quiet moments of vulnerability. Jack had learned much from her, but he still struggled to find his place. One evening, after another long day of strategy meetings and battle preparations, Jack found himself alone in the quiet of the compound. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the blade Callus had given him. It was the symbol of their bond, but it was also a reminder of the challenges he still faced. The blade had once been an object of fear and confusion for him, something foreign in his hands. But now, it felt like a natural extension of his body, a tool of survival, a tool that held a deeper meaning. His thoughts were interrupted by a light knock on the door. He stood quickly, tucking the blade back into its sheath as the door opened to reveal Callus standing in the doorway. Her silhouette was framed by the dim light of the corridor, the war paint on her face still striking in the evening light. "You're still up," Callus said, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I thought you'd be resting by now." "I couldn't sleep," Jack replied, his voice hoarse from the tension of the day. "I've been thinking about everything, and I guess I haven't quite figured it all out yet." Callus stepped inside, her presence filling the room like it always did. "You're not supposed to have all the answers, Jack," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "You're learning. That's all any of us can do." Jack didn't respond right away. He had heard her say those words many times before, but they still didn't quite sink in. He had never been someone to simply accept things without understanding them first. And this bond with Callus, this role he had been thrust into, was something he couldn't fully grasp. "Not yet, anyway." "I didn't come here to become a leader," Jack finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "I came here to make sure we all survived." But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about survival, didn't it? Callus smiled, though it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a knowing smile, one that Jack had seen 1,000 times on her face. "It stopped being about just survival a long time ago. When you caught my blade, it was never just about that anymore. You made a choice the moment you picked it up, Jack. And I think deep down, you knew that." Jack stared at the floor, his mind spinning. She was right, of course. He had made that choice. The moment he caught her blade, his fate had been sealed. But it wasn't just his fate. It was hers too. And now, with every challenge they faced, with every step they took, they were bound not just by law or tradition, but by something far deeper. "I didn't expect this," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect any of it. But I can't back out now. I don't want to." Callus walked over to him, her expression softening as she reached out and touched his shoulder. "You don't have to back out, Jack. But I want you to know that it's not just about me, or the tribe. This is about us. We fight together, lead together. And no matter what happens, we'll do it as equals. But you need to believe that. In yourself. You're not just following me anymore. You're leading beside me." Jack nodded slowly, his gaze still on the ground. I want to be with you. I want to do this right. But I'm not sure how." Callus's hand remained on his shoulder, warm and steady. "You'll learn. You already are. You've already proven that you have the strength to lead. Now, you have to trust in that strength. Trust in yourself, and in me. We're in this together, Jack." For the first time, Jack allowed himself to believe it. He wasn't sure if he had the strength Callus saw in him. But he did know one thing, he wasn't the same man who had first caught her blade. He had grown. He had learned, sometimes the hard way, but he had learned. And now, standing beside Callus, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready to face it. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice steady. "I'm ready to fight beside you, Callus. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Callus's smile widened, her eyes softening in a way Jack had rarely seen before. "Good. Then let's make sure the future we're fighting for is one we both want." She moved closer, her hand sliding to his, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something real, something lasting. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for each other. And that was a fight worth winning. As the night stretched on, the weight of their bond settled over them. They were no longer two separate entities, they were a unit, a force that would shape the future together. Jack wasn't sure what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure: with Callus by his side, he was ready to face it. They would build something stronger than just a warlord's reign. They would build a future, together. The days began to blur as Jack and Callus continued to face challenge after challenge. The bond between them had solidified, but the weight of it, the responsibilities that came with their shared leadership, had grown heavier. Callus's tribe had never been one to accept weakness, and Jack, despite his increasing understanding of their world, still had doubts. He wasn't sure if he could lead them to the kind of future Callus dreamed of, and he wasn't sure if they could count on him the way they counted on her. It wasn't just the battles that weighed on him. It was the diplomacy, the shifting alliances, the quiet moments of doubt when he would wonder if he was ready for the role he had been thrust into. Every decision seemed to carry a greater consequence. And every time Jack thought he might falter, Callus was there, pushing him, challenging him, and reassuring him that he had what it took. But even she couldn't protect him from the doubts that crept in during the quiet moments. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal training session with the warriors, Jack found himself alone at the edge of the compound, gazing out over the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rocky land, and the air had cooled, carrying the scent of the wilderness. It was peaceful in a way that contrasted sharply with the chaos of his days. "You're becoming one of us," Callus's voice broke through his thoughts, and Jack didn't even need to turn around to know it was her. He could feel her presence, steady and commanding, behind him. Jack didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure how to. The weight of her words hung in the air between them, but the truth was that he didn't feel like one of them. Not yet. Not completely. He had been thrust into this role, this world, without preparation, and while he had learned to fight, to lead in small ways, the doubt remained. "I'm trying," Jack said quietly, his gaze still on the fading light. "But sometimes I feel like I'm not really in this. Like I'm playing a part, and eventually, someone's going to realize I don't belong here." Callus walked around to stand in front of him, her eyes sharp but her expression softening. She studied him for a long moment, as if reading something in him that he hadn't yet acknowledged. "You do belong here. I wouldn't have chosen you if I didn't believe in you. You've already shown that you can lead, more than most. But I see your doubt, Jack. And I won't tell you that you shouldn't feel it. I only ask that you don't let it stop you. Don't let it define you." Jack's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he saw not just the warlord, but the person who had fought to keep this tribe alive. She wasn't perfect, no one was, but her conviction had always been clear. "It's hard to just believe in myself like that," Jack admitted, his voice heavy. "When everything around me seems so uncertain. And this," he gestured to the vast land around them, the tribe they were trying to unite. "This isn't a world I understand, Callus. This is your world. You've lived it your entire life. I'm still trying to figure out where I fit." Callus took a step closer to him, her presence overwhelming in the way it always was. "You fit because you choose to be here. You choose this. It's not about understanding every detail of my world, Jack. It's about being in it, feeling it, and adapting to what comes. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out." Her words were a balm to the storm of doubt swirling inside him. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. Is that what you've always done? Adapt? Jack asked, looking at her more closely. Callus smiled slightly, though there was a trace of something wistful in her eyes. Every day, she said simply. From the moment I became leader, I had to adapt. I had to survive in a world that never stopped changing. I didn't have the luxury of sitting back and wondering if I belonged. I just fought for my place, and for my people. She paused, then added, and you're doing the same. You've already proven that. Jack swallowed, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. He thought back to the moments when he had felt like an outsider, the moments when he had wanted to run, to get away from the pressure. But he hadn't run. He was still here. Standing by Callus. Fighting beside her. I'm not sure I can lead the way you do, Jack said, his voice quiet but resolute. But I'll stand by you. I'll help guide this tribe. And I'll fight for them. For us. Callus's smile grew, this time reaching her eyes. That's all I need, Jack. That's all I've ever needed. She reached out, taking his hand, and for the first time in weeks, Jack felt like he truly belonged. Not just in this world, not just beside Callus, but as part of something larger than himself. A tribe. A future. Something he never expected, but something he was willing to fight for. Together, she whispered, her voice steady and sure. We'll fight for the future. For everything we've built. They stood there, in the fading light of the day, the quiet bond between them settling in deeper than the physical connection they shared. It wasn't just about fighting beside her anymore, it was about fighting for her. Fighting for the future they would build, together. Over the next few days, Jack found himself increasingly involved in the leadership of the tribe. No longer an outsider, no longer just a mate of the Warlord, he became part of the decision-making process, part of the vision that Callus had for the future of her people. The tasks weren't easy, there were battles to fight, alliances to forge, and rivals to contend with, but Jack found strength in the unity they were building. He wasn't just learning from Callus. He was learning from the people themselves, from the warriors who respected him not because of his position, but because of the actions he took, the decisions he made. In every fight, in every negotiation, Jack became more than he had ever imagined. He found himself not just standing beside Callus, but leading with her, making decisions that shaped the future of the tribe. He had become a leader, in his own way. One evening, after a particularly intense strategy session, Callus and Jack sat together by the fire, watching as the flames flickered and danced in the night. The tribe had retreated for the night, leaving them alone. It had been a long day, filled with planning and preparation for the next battle. This isn't just about survival anymore, is it? Jack said, his voice quiet in the night. Callus shook her head, her eyes distant for a moment. No. It's about creating something lasting. Something that will endure. Jack looked at her, the realization sinking in fully. They weren't just fighting for today. They were fighting for a future. Together. And in that moment, Jack knew he had found his place, not just by her side, but in this world. This was home. This was their future. And he was ready to face whatever came next, not just for himself, but for Callus and the tribe they would lead together. The war drums had fallen silent. The tension that had permeated the air for so long had finally broken, and the silence that followed was heavy, filled with a sense of accomplishment and relief. Jack stood beside Callus, watching as the last of the rival tribes retreated, their forces scattered and broken. The tribe, her people, were victorious. The future they had fought for was now within their reach. Jack's body still ached from the battle, but his mind was clear. The days of uncertainty, the doubts he had carried with him, seemed like a distant memory now. They had weathered the storm. They had fought together, not just for survival, but for the future of the tribe, for their shared vision. And now, as the horizon darkened with the setting sun, Jack realized something that had been true from the start: he had found his place here. Not just as Callus's mate, not just as her partner, but as someone who had earned his place among the tribe. Someone who had fought to be a leader. Callus turned to him, her gaze steady and unwavering, her eyes glowing in the fading light. Her presence had always been commanding, but there was something softer in her expression now. Something that Jack had only ever seen in moments like this, when they were alone, when the battle was over, and all that remained was what they had built together. "We did it," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "They're gone. The tribe is safe." Jack nodded, though his thoughts were still racing. He had seen the look of pride in her eyes after the battle, but he had also seen something else, a flicker of something deeper, something he hadn't fully understood until now. They had fought together, led together, and now, for the first time, Jack allowed himself to believe that he was exactly where he was meant to be. "This is just the beginning," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We've won this battle, but there's still work to do. We have to rebuild. We have to unite the tribes for good." Callus smiled, the fierceness in her eyes softened by the quiet of the moment. "That's why you're here, Jack. That's why you're with me. We'll rebuild. Together." Jack looked at her, feeling the weight of her words settle in. She wasn't just speaking of the physical rebuilding, of the walls that had been broken down in battle. She was speaking of something much bigger, the future they were going to build, side by side. He wasn't just a partner in war anymore, he was a partner in leadership. In every way that mattered, they were equals. "I couldn't have done it without you," Jack said, his voice low but sincere. "You pushed me to become something more than I thought I could be. I didn't even know I had it in me." "You had it in you all along," Callus replied, her hand finding his. Her grip was firm, but there was a softness to it, a comfort that was almost unfamiliar. It wasn't just a hand of a warlord. It was the hand of a partner, of someone who had walked beside him through every trial, every challenge. "I didn't just follow you, Callus," Jack said, his voice filled with conviction. "I fought beside you. I chose this, just as you did. I chose to be part of this world, to help lead it. To help lead with you." Callus's smile widened, though there was a hint of something more in her eyes. It wasn't just pride or satisfaction, it was something deeper, something Jack had come to recognize as the bond they shared. Something that had grown between them, forged in battle, in the quiet moments, and in the challenges they had faced together. "You've proven yourself more than anyone I've ever known," Callus said softly. "Not because of your strength, not because of your tactics, but because of your heart. You're mine, Jack, not just because of the blade you caught, but because you chose to stand by me. To stand with me. And that means everything." Jack looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he didn't feel like the outsider. He didn't feel like he was just a man from another world, thrown into something he didn't understand. He felt like he belonged. He felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. And he wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the challenges, not of the uncertainty. He had found his place, beside Callus, as her partner in every way that mattered. "I choose you, too," Jack said, his voice steady, his heart full. "Not just as a leader, but as my equal. As my partner. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Callus's expression softened, the fierceness of her warlord persona slipping away, replaced by something deeper, something more personal. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing across his cheek. The touch was tender, intimate, and Jack felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the heat of battle. It was a warmth that came from the connection they had forged, from the bond they had built together. "I've never needed anyone like I need you, Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the night. "Not like this. Not in the way we are. We're not just partners in war. We're partners in everything. And that means more to me than you could ever know." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in, before he leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow, deliberate, and filled with everything they had fought for. It was a kiss that sealed their future, a promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. When they pulled away, Jack rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool night air. He could feel the weight of the future ahead of them, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a new beginning. "Together," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Always. Callus smiled, her eyes soft and filled with something Jack had never seen before. Always, she echoed. And as they stood there, side by side, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jack realized that this wasn't just the end of one chapter. This was the beginning of a new story, one that they would write together. The future was uncertain, yes, but with Callus by his side, Jack knew they could face anything. Together. This was home. This was their future. And whatever came next, they would face it, not as two separate forces, but as one. Always.